You might want to hang up that call, I said, watching the red and blue lights ripple across the surface of the lake like something alive. The cruiser rolled to a slow stop at the edge of my gravel driveway, tires crunching like dry cereal under weight, and for a second everything felt too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then the radio crackled, doors opened, and I caught the faint smell of lake water mixed with hot engine oil drifting through the late afternoon heat. Rebecca Hayes stood 10 feet behind the patrol car, arms folded, chin lifted just enough to make sure I could see the satisfaction on her face. She didn't wave. Didn't need to. That little smile said everything. She thought she'd already won. I leaned against the railing of my porch, fingers resting on the warm wood, watching it all unfold like I wasn't part of the scene. 3 weeks. That's how long I'd been here. 3 weeks of quiet mornings, glassy water, and neighbors who watched from behind their blinds like I'd broken some invisible rule just by existing. I kept to myself. No parties. No noise. No problems. Until Rebecca decided I was one. Sir, one of the officers called out, voice measured, professional, but already leaning in her direction. We received a complaint about trespassing and refusal to comply with HOA regulations. There it was. HOA. I could almost taste the word. Bitter, artificial, like cheap sweetener in bad coffee. I nodded once, slow, letting the moment stretch. And who filed that complaint? I asked, even though I already knew. Rebecca stepped forward just enough for the sunlight to catch the gold chain around her neck, and that's when I saw it. A small silver key hanging from it. Not decorative. Not random. Clean edges. Distinct cut pattern. I'd seen that design before. My fingers tightened slightly on the railing, but my face didn't move. Not yet. I did, she said, voice smooth, rehearsed, like she'd practiced this exact moment in the mirror. He's refusing to join the Lakeview HOA, and he's been using private lake access without authorization. Private. That word echoed louder than the siren had. I glanced past her, out toward the water stretching nearly half a mile wide, sunlight breaking into sharp reflections across the surface. Private. Interesting choice. And you're certain about that? I asked, keeping my tone calm, almost bored. She tilted her head, smile tightening, just a fraction. I'm the president of this HOA, she said. I'm certain about everything that happens here. The officer shifted his weight beside his car, eyes flicking between us, waiting for this to resolve itself into something simple. Something easy. I could feel the heat pressing against my back, the faint hum of insects rising from the shoreline, the distant slap of water against the dock. Everything ordinary. Everything quiet. Except for the part where Rebecca Hayes had just called the police on the man who owned the paper her name was printed on. I exhaled slowly, reached into my pocket, and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up in my hand, reflection flickering across my face. All right, I said softly. Let's take a look at that. I did not move right away, just let the phone sit in my hand as the screen brightness adjusted to the sun, the glass reflecting the patrol lights in fractured streaks of red and blue that danced across my knuckles. The officer closest to me cleared his throat, that polite kind of impatience that says he wants this wrapped up before dinner. Sir, we're going to need you to either comply with the HOA regulations or vacate the private access area, he said, each word careful, practiced. I nodded slowly, like I was considering something complicated, even though I had already made up my mind the moment Rebecca opened her mouth. The gravel shifted under my boots as I stepped down from the porch, each crunch loud in the stillness, and the faint smell of sun-warmed wood and lake algae followed me as I closed the distance. Rebecca did not step back. Of course she did not. People like her never step back. They lean in. You are making this harder than it needs to be, she said, lowering her voice just enough to sound reasonable for the officers, but sharp enough that I could hear the edge. Everyone here follows the rules. That is how we maintain property value. Property value. There it was again. Not community. Not fairness. Value. I glanced at the houses lining the shore, identical paint tones, identical docks, identical little flags fluttering in identical breezes. Cookie-cutter control wrapped in polite language. My thumb tapped the screen once, opening a folder. I had not touched in weeks, and for a second I just watched the file names scroll past. Purchase agreements. Title transfers. Lease contracts. All neat. All quiet. All very real. Officer, I said, lifting my eyes back up. Before I go anywhere, can I ask a quick question? He nodded, cautious now, like he could feel something shifting even if he could not see it yet. Go ahead. I tilted my head slightly toward Rebecca without taking my eyes off him. When someone files a complaint about trespassing, do you usually verify ownership first, or do you just take their word for it? That did it. A small pause. Just half a second, but enough. The other officer shifted his stance, hand resting casually near his belt, not threatening, just ready. Rebecca let out a soft laugh, quick and dismissive. This is not complicated, she said, stepping closer, that silver key catching the light again. He is not part of the association. He does not have rights here. Not part of the association. I almost smiled. Instead, I turned the phone around, holding it low at first, letting the officers lean in just enough to see the header line on the document. Black text. Clean formatting. Legal language that does not care about opinions. This is a lease agreement, I said calmly. Filed, recorded, and active as of last year. The first officer leaned in a little more, eyes narrowing as he read, lips moving slightly like he was sounding out the details in his head. Rebecca did not look yet. She did not need to. She was still certain, still in control. And? She asked, impatience creeping in now. I scrolled once, slow, deliberate, letting the next section settle into view. Tenant name. Property address. Signature block. The air shifted again, subtle but real, like the moment before a storm decides which direction it is going to move. And, I said quietly, it might help if you take a closer look at who signed it. Rebecca did not reach for the phone right away, and that hesitation told me more than anything she had said so far, because confidence does not pause. It moves, it dominates, it fills space, but doubt slips in quiet and sits heavy in the chest. The officer closest to me angled the screen slightly so the sunlight would not wash out the text, his brow tightening as he read the name printed in clean black letters. I watched his eyes track from the top of the page down to the signature line, then back up again like he needed to make sure it had not changed. Ma'am, he said carefully, glancing toward Rebecca. Can you step a little closer? She exhaled through her nose, annoyed more than concerned, heels clicking against the driveway as she closed the distance. That polished, controlled posture still intact, still convinced this was just a formality. The silver key at her neck swayed slightly as she leaned in, catching the light again, and for a split second I remembered the day those keys were cut, the weight of them in my hand, the quiet satisfaction of locking in ownership without anyone in this neighborhood realizing what had just shifted beneath their feet. This is ridiculous, she muttered, but she looked. Of course she did. People like her always look when there is paperwork involved. That is their language. That is where they think they win. Her eyes moved across the page quickly at first, scanning, dismissing, searching for something familiar that would confirm her version of reality, but then they slowed. Just slightly. Just enough. The officer did not say anything this time. He did not need to. The silence did the work for him. I could hear the faint lapping of water against the dock behind us, steady and indifferent, and somewhere down the shoreline a screen door slammed shut, the sound echoing across the lake like punctuation. Rebecca straightened a fraction, then leaned in again, closer this time, like proximity might change what she was seeing. That does not mean anything, she said, but her voice had lost that smooth edge, replaced with something thinner, tighter. People rent properties all the time. That does not give him authority over the HOA. I nodded once, slow, letting her finish, letting her build just enough ground to stand on before it shifted. You are right, I said. Renting does not give me authority over the HOA. I reached out, tapped the screen again, and scrolled just enough to bring the header into full view. The company name sitting there in bold, official, impossible to ignore. The officer's eyes followed the motion instantly. Rebecca's followed a half-second later. That half-second was everything. But it does give me authority over the property you are standing in front of. I continued, voice even, controlled, no rush, no pressure, just facts laid out in order. The officer let out a quiet breath, almost a whistle, low enough that it barely broke the air, but I heard it. Rebecca did not move this time. Not at all. Her shoulders stayed squared, her chin still lifted, but the confidence that had been driving every word she said since those patrol lights rolled in had started to fracture, fine cracks spreading through something that had always looked solid from the outside. You might want to scroll down, I added, tilting the phone slightly toward her. Right where your name is signed. Rebecca's eyes dropped to the bottom of the screen, and this time they did not skim. They locked, like something inside her had finally decided to pay attention, and I watched it happen in real time. The exact moment certainty started to slip. The lake breeze moved across the driveway, carrying that faint mineral smell of water and sun-warmed stone, and for a second nobody said anything. The officer leaned in just enough to follow her line of sight, his shoulder brushing the edge of the patrol car door, his expression shifting from routine to something sharper, more alert. "Is that your signature, ma'am?" he asked, not accusing, just precise. Rebecca did not answer right away. Her lips parted slightly, then pressed together again, and her hand came up almost unconsciously to touch the chain at her neck, fingers brushing that silver key like it might anchor her back into control. "This does not change anything," she said finally, but the words landed softer now, less certain, like they were testing the ground instead of claiming it. I did not interrupt her. I did not need to. The document was doing the talking. I shifted my weight slightly, gravel crunching under my heel, and tapped the screen again, bringing up the company registration line, the ownership structure sitting there in plain language, filed, verified, undeniable. "The lease is executed through Caldwell Property Holdings," I said, my voice steady, almost conversational. "That is the entity that owns the property." The officer's eyes flicked up to mine, then back to the screen, connecting pieces that had not mattered 30 seconds ago, but suddenly mattered a lot. Rebecca's gaze followed slower this time, like she already knew what she was going to see, but did not want to confirm it. "And you represent that company?" the officer asked. I gave a small nod. "I do more than represent it," I said. "I own it." The words settled into the space between us, heavy and quiet, and I could almost feel the shift ripple outward, like a stone dropped into still water. Rebecca straightened fully now, shoulders tightening, posture correcting itself as if form alone could restore authority. "That is not relevant to HOA jurisdiction," she said quickly, the confidence trying to rebuild itself, piece by piece. "We have community rules, and he is refusing to comply." I tilted my head slightly, studying her for a moment. The way her eyes kept flicking back to the phone, the way her grip on that key had tightened just enough to turn her knuckles pale. "You are absolutely right about one thing," I said calmly. "HOA rules apply to members of the association." I let that sit for a beat, just long enough for the officer to glance between us again, waiting. "But membership is tied to ownership and recorded agreements," I continued, my tone even, measured. "And the parcel you are referring to is not part of the HOA registry. It is a separate holding, leased directly." The officer nodded slowly now, understanding, catching up to the situation in full. Rebecca shook her head once, sharp, dismissive, like she could shake the facts loose if she moved fast enough. "That is not how this community works," she said, but the edge was gone now, replaced with something strained. I took a small step back, giving her space, not out of respect, but because the moment had already turned, and I did not need to stand close to it anymore. "It is exactly how contracts work," I said quietly, letting the words land clean and final. The lake behind us stayed calm, the same steady rhythm against the dock, the same quiet reflection of fading light, like nothing had changed at all, except everything had. The silence stretched longer this time, not empty but full, like the air had weight now, pressing down on every word that did not get said. The officer shifted his stance again, slower, more deliberate, his earlier confidence replaced with something cautious, almost careful, like he was stepping through unfamiliar ground. "Ma'am," he said, turning slightly toward Rebecca, "do you have any documentation that shows this property falls under HOA jurisdiction?" It was a simple question, but it landed hard, because questions like that do not get asked when someone is in control, they get asked when control is slipping. Rebecca blinked once, then again, like she was resetting her focus, pulling herself back together piece by piece. "Of course it does," she replied quickly, too quickly, her voice climbing just enough to give away the strain underneath. "This entire lakeside is part of Lakeview. Everyone here is subject to the same rules. Everyone." That word hung in the air, broad and absolute, the kind of word people use when they have never had to prove it. I did not move. I let her speak, let her fill the space, because every sentence she added without backing it up made the contrast sharper. The officer nodded slightly, not agreeing, just acknowledging, then glanced back at me. Sir, do you have anything that shows this parcel is excluded? I turned the phone back toward myself, thumb sliding across the screen with a quiet, deliberate motion, opening another file, this one older, heavier in its implications. The faint reflection of the lake shimmered across the glass as the document loaded, lines of legal description and survey coordinates appearing one after another. Recorded subdivision map, I said, angling the screen so both officers could see. Filed with the county 12 years ago. You can see the boundary line here. I zoomed in slightly, the edge of the parcel highlighted in a clean, precise line that cut just outside the uniform grid of the HOA lots. A small gap. Easy to miss if you did not know what you were looking for. Impossible to ignore once you did. The second officer leaned in now, closer than before, his finger hovering just above the screen without touching it. So this lot is separate? He asked. Completely separate, I replied. Different deed, different registry, different governing terms. Rebecca shook her head again, sharper this time, a flick of movement that sent the key at her neck swinging. That is not accurate, she said, but the words came out thinner now, stretched tight. We have always managed this entire shoreline. Managed, not owned. I caught that, and so did the officer. His eyes flicked toward her, then back to the map, then back to me, the pieces settling into place whether she liked it or not. The late afternoon light had shifted lower now, casting longer shadows across the driveway, the patrol car lights still flashing but somehow less dominant, like they had lost their authority along with her argument. I locked the screen and slipped the phone back into my pocket, the motion slow, unhurried, final. You can manage what people agree to give you, I said quietly. You cannot manage what you do not control. The officer straightened, exhaling softly, the decision forming behind his eyes before he even spoke. Rebecca opened her mouth again, ready to push back, ready to reclaim ground that was already gone, but the timing had shifted, and for the first time since she stepped onto my driveway, she was the one reacting instead of directing. And that changed everything. The first officer straightened fully now, shoulders squaring as his posture shifted from passive observer to someone making a decision, and the tone in his voice changed with it, quieter but firmer, like the situation had finally settled into something clear. Ma'am, he said, turning toward Rebecca with a measured calm. Based on what we are seeing here, this appears to be a civil matter, not a trespassing issue. The words landed clean, without force, but they carried weight, the kind that does not need volume to be understood. Rebecca's jaw tightened, just slightly, the muscles near her cheek flexing as she processed what he had just said, and for the first time since the patrol car pulled in, she did not immediately respond. The flashing lights continued to pulse behind her, but they felt distant now, almost irrelevant, like they belonged to a different version of this moment. That is not correct, she said finally, her voice controlled but thinner, stretched across something fragile. He is refusing to comply with established community standards. The officer nodded once, acknowledging the statement without accepting it, his gaze steady. Community standards only apply where they are legally enforceable, he replied. And from what he has shown us, this property is not under your association's authority. The second officer stepped back half a pace, giving space, his attention no longer fixed on me but on her, like the direction of concern had quietly reversed. I stayed where I was, hands relaxed at my sides, the heat of the day still pressing against my shirt, the faint hum of insects rising as the sun dipped lower toward the tree line. I did not need to say anything. The structure was already in place. Rebecca let out a short breath, something between a laugh and disbelief, and shook her head. So you were just going to take his word for it? She asked, gesturing toward me without looking directly, like I had become something inconvenient rather than central. The officer glanced at me briefly, then back at her. We are taking the documentation into account, he said. If you have anything that contradicts it, you are welcome to present it. That was the moment the balance fully tipped, not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet shift that settled into place with finality. Rebecca's hand dropped from the key at her neck, falling to her side, fingers flexing once like she was trying to grab hold of something that was no longer there. This is not over, she said, but it did not sound like a declaration anymore. It sounded like something she needed to believe. I tilted my head slightly, meeting her eyes for the first time since the officers arrived. Not aggressive, not challenging, just steady. I never said it was, I replied. The lake behind us caught the last stretch of sunlight, the surface turning a deep gold that reflected across the lower panels of the patrol car, and for a second the whole scene looked almost calm, like nothing significant had just happened. The first officer reached for his radio, speaking quietly into it, his voice low and routine again, but the direction had changed. They were not here for me anymore. Rebecca shifted her weight, heels scraping lightly against the gravel, and took a small step back, not enough for anyone to comment on, but enough that I noticed. Enough that she noticed too. And in that single step, the authority she had walked in with did not disappear, it just stopped working. The officers began to step back toward their cruiser, not in a rush, just a slow, natural retreat that said everything without needing to say it out loud. Their job here already done, their interest already fading. The radio on the dash crackled softly as one of them opened the driver's side door, the sound blending into the steady rhythm of the lake behind us, water brushing against wood in a quiet, repetitive pattern that felt almost deliberate now. Rebecca did not move at first. She stood there, still facing me, still holding onto the shape of authority even as the substance had slipped away, her shoulders squared, chin lifted, but there was a stiffness to it now, like a posture being maintained instead of lived. "You think this changes anything?" she said, her voice lower, tighter, the confidence forced into place rather than flowing naturally. I watched her for a second, taking in the details I had noticed from the beginning but never needed to comment on. The careful way her appearance was put together, the way everything about her suggested control, order, rules that worked in her favor. "It already has," I said simply. No emphasis, no edge, just a statement that did not need decoration. She let out a breath through her nose, sharper this time, and glanced briefly toward the patrol car, as if expecting it to still be part of her side of the equation. But the officers were no longer watching us, no longer waiting for her signal. That connection had been cut, clean and quiet. The sun had dropped lower now, casting long shadows across the gravel, the light catching the edges of the dock and turning the surface of the lake into a darker, deeper mirror. A couple of neighbors had stepped out onto their porches down the shoreline, pretending not to watch, but watching anyway, their silhouettes still against the fading light. Rebecca noticed them too. Of course she did. People like her always know when they have an audience. Her hand lifted again to that silver key, fingers closing around it, but this time the motion felt different, not anchoring, not confident, just something to hold on to. "This community has standards," she said, trying again, the words slower now, more deliberate, like she was choosing each one carefully. "And everyone who lives here is expected to respect them." I tilted my head slightly, considering that, letting the quiet stretch just enough to make her feel it. "Standards only matter when they are agreed to," I replied, "not when they are assumed." Her eyes flickered, just for a second, and I could see the calculation starting behind them. The shift from confrontation to something else, something more strategic, more careful. She was not done. She was just adjusting. The officer in the driver's seat started the engine, the low rumble filling the space where tension had been a few moments before, and the flashing lights finally cut off, leaving the scene in natural light again, softer, quieter, real. Rebecca took a small step back, then another, each one subtle, controlled, like she could still frame it as her choice if she moved slowly enough. "We will be reviewing this," she said, the words more composed now, less emotional, sliding back into that administrative tone she knew how to use. I gave a slight nod, acknowledging without conceding. "I would expect you to," I said. She held my gaze for a second longer, searching for something, maybe a crack, maybe a reaction, but there was nothing there for her to grab onto. Just stillness. Just certainty. The lake breeze moved between us again, cooler now as the day faded, carrying the faint scent of water and distant wood smoke. And for the first time since she walked up behind that patrol car, Rebecca Hayes looked like someone who had realized she was standing on ground she did not actually own. The patrol car pulled away slowly, tires rolling over gravel with a soft crunch that faded into the distance. And just like that, the official presence that had filled the driveway a few minutes ago was gone, leaving behind nothing but quiet air and a situation that no longer belonged to anyone but the two of us. Rebecca stood still for a moment after the car disappeared around the bend, her gaze fixed in the direction it had gone, as if she expected it to come back and restore something that had already slipped out of reach. The lake had gone darker now, the gold reflection fading into deep blue, and the first hint of evening coolness moved through the air, carrying the scent of damp wood and distant grass. I rested my hand lightly against the porch railing again, feeling the grain under my fingers, grounding, steady, unchanged. "You made this public," I said quietly, not accusing, just stating what had already happened. Her head turned back toward me, slower this time, her expression tighter, more controlled, like she was rebuilding herself behind her eyes. "You could have just complied," she replied, but there was no heat left in it, just something defensive, something that needed to justify the last 15 minutes. I gave a small nod, acknowledging the logic she wanted to believe. "I could have," I said, "but then it would have become real." That landed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to sit there between us and make sense in a way she did not like. She looked past me toward the house, toward the dock, toward the water, like she was seeing it differently now, like she was measuring something she had never needed to measure before. Ownership has a way of doing that. It changes how space feels. It changes what belongs and what is not. Her fingers tightened around the key again, but she did not lift it this time. She just held it, like a habit she had not yet broken. "We have managed this lake for years," she said, quieter now, less certain, more like she was explaining something to herself than to me. "Everyone here understands how things work." I let a breath out slowly, watching it disappear into the cooling air. "Everyone here understands what they were told," I said. "That is not the same thing." She shook her head once, but it was smaller, less forceful, like the energy behind it had been drained. Down the shoreline, one of the neighbors stepped back inside, their porch light flicking on with a soft click, then another light farther down, small points of yellow appearing one by one as the evening settled in. The scene was returning to normal, but the meaning underneath it had shifted permanently. Rebecca took another step back, then another, each one more natural than the last, like she was finally accepting the direction this had gone. "We will be in touch," she said, the words falling back into that formal tone, something she could control, something she could still use. I nodded once. "I am sure you will," I replied. She turned then, finally, the movement smooth but slower than before, and began walking back toward the path that led to her side of the shoreline, heels pressing into the gravel with a softer rhythm than when she arrived. I watched her go for a moment, the distance between us widening, the tension dissolving into something quieter, something settled. Then I looked back out over the lake, the surface dark and still, and for the first time since. The sirens cut through the afternoon. Everything felt exactly where it was supposed to be. The last light slipped behind the trees, leaving the lake in that quiet blue-gray stillness where everything looked softer but somehow more defined. And I stood there for a moment longer, listening to the water touch the edge of the dock in slow, even intervals, like it had all the time in the world. The neighborhood settled back into its routine, porch lights glowing, distant voices carrying just far enough to remind you that people were there without pulling you into their space. I turned and stepped inside, the wooden floor cool under my boots, the faint scent of clean air and old cedar wrapping around me as the door closed with a soft, final click. The silence inside was different from the silence outside. Controlled. Owned. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and for a second just looked at it, the dark screen reflecting a faint outline of my face, calm, unchanged, like nothing had really happened, even though everything had shifted. 3 weeks. That was all it took. 3 weeks for assumptions to build, for lines to be drawn, for someone to decide what I was allowed to be in a place they never actually controlled. I walked over to the window that faced the water, resting my hand against the frame, watching the last trace of movement on the surface fade into stillness. Somewhere out there, Rebecca was probably already making calls, already pulling together whatever version of control she thought she could rebuild, and I knew she would not stop. People like her never do. They just change tactics. They move from loud to quiet, from public to private, from pressure to paperwork. That was fine. Paperwork was something I understood better than most. I reached into the drawer by the counter and pulled out a small folder, the same one I had set aside before I even moved in, edges crisp, contents organized down to the smallest detail. lease agreements, recorded deeds, corporate filings. Every piece sitting exactly where it needed to be, not because I expected trouble, but because I never walk into a place like this without knowing exactly what I am standing on. I flipped it open slowly, the pages making that soft, familiar sound as they shifted, and for a moment I stopped. On the lease, her name printed clean and clear, her signature anchored at the bottom like a decision she had never expected to matter. Funny how things work like that. The smallest line on a page can outweigh the loudest voice in a room. I closed the folder and set it back in the drawer, the motion deliberate, final, like placing a piece back on a board after the move has already been made. Outside, the lake stayed calm, untouched by any of it, reflecting nothing but the quiet sky above. I turned off the kitchen light, letting the room fall into shadow, and stood there for one last second before heading deeper into the house. The kind of stillness settling in that only comes when everything is exactly where it belongs. They think power is about who speaks the loudest, who calls the shots, who controls the scene. It is not. Power is quiet. It is written down. It is signed, filed, and waiting. And the moment you understand that, you realize something they never do. Justice does not need to rush. It just needs to exist.